An army focused on destruction, the Mongols, neither good nor bad, could stop them. They carved mountains of ice and deserts of fire. The shadow assassins of the assassins, the heavily armored Crusader knights, the Great Wall of China, nothing could stop them. Until an ordinary man appeared before them, a man who rose from slavery to rulership. This is the story of a Turk who changed the course of history with blood. Sultan Baybars. Baybars, the ambitious, aggressive, and ruthless Desti, was born in 1223 to an ordinary family in the region known as the Kipchak region, encompassing the northern Black Sea and a portion of Central Asia. In those years, the world was not a very cheerful place. The Mongols, a rising power from the east, were advancing, destroying everything in their path. Baybars' tribe, along with several Turkic tribes fleeing the Mongol invasion, settled in Bulgaria. However, the Mongols soon reached this region as well. Baybars' entire family, siblings, mother, and father, were killed by the Mongols under horrific torture before his eyes. Everyone he knew was destroyed. Young Baybars swore revenge for what he had experienced there. He was taken captive. He was brought to the slave market in Sivas. After being sold there, his first master believed that Baybars would bring bad luck, perhaps because Baybars had blue eyes and a deep voice. His master was right to be afraid and sold him again. He was taken to Egypt as a slave during this period. The Ayyubids ruled Egypt, and traditionally the country's primary military force was the Mamluks, who were Turkish soldiers brought as slaves. Baybars was taken to a training camp with other young men like himself to be trained. Don't think of Egypt as an Arab country like today. Many Turkic tribes escaping Mongol oppression settled in Egypt, and approximately 20% of the population was Turkic. These people were doing what they knew best. The military service was the protective force of the Ayyubids and the Abbasid Islamic Caliphate. The Resi language in these military units was Turkish. Turks like themselves, who came from Central Asia and Anatolia, were called Mamluks. Literally, these men were slaves under the command of their masters. Even some Mamluk soldiers were trained quite harshly. On his helmet, there is a teardrop shape as seen on the screen. This represents the hardships they endured. They were brought as village, without families, and the bond between the loyalists was so strong that they called each other Hoshtash. In other words, a kind of comrade brother. An intelligent and ambitious young man, Baybars managed to rise among the Hoshtash village in a short time and became a medium-sized commander. In 1250, chaos was brewing. A new crusade was about to begin. The 7 Crusaders under the command of Louis had already set out to conquer Egypt. However, Baybars and his companions, who had already earned the title of commander thanks to their success, were in for a great surprise. They entered the city of Varmansura. The Crusaders found the city completely abandoned. They thought the townspeople were fleeing a possible massacre. As the Crusaders moved cautiously through the streets, the Mamluks who had hidden in their houses suddenly appeared and occupied almost all of the city. He put the Crusaders to the sword. King Lin, even his brother, died in Masura. Baybars, a young commander, describes that day as follows: "We waited until the Franks entered the narrowest streets. Our beautiful stones. We spoke not with our mouths, but with our eyes." These defeats suffered by the Crusaders are recorded in a knight's notes as follows:
"Anger and sadness sit in my heart, so tightly that I don't even dare to survive. It seems as if God is against us. Oh my God, holy, they will turn Mary's monastery into a mosque. We will have to sleep too. Anyone who wants to fight the Turks is mad, because Jesus Christ is no longer fighting them. They have conquered. They will conquer, because every day they drag us down. Knowing that God is now sleeping and Muhammad is growing stronger, Baybars's adventures begin. This crusade would ultimately be one of the most important turning points in his life. Finally, the Ayyubid Sultan Turan Shah held the power of the army. With the Mamluks in his hands, The conflict began, and while Sultan Turanshah was having a feast on the Nile, Baybars and his friends turned the feast into a bloodbath, killing the Sultan and many of the Ayyubids with him. In fact, the person who swung his sword at Turanshah in this incident was Baybars himself. Later in the process, in the same year, 1250, Aybek, a Mamluk commander, ascended to the throne. The state's name is no longer Ayyubid, but Mamluk, meaning its official name is Turkey. Yes, indeed, the Mamluk state's official name is Turkey. That is, the state of the Turks. The Turks, once brought as slaves, now rule over the lands of Egypt. Note the flag carried by Mamluk soldiers on the screen. The modern-day Turkish flag also dates back to that time. However, when the parties disagreed over who would be the Sultan, Baybars was forced to flee Egypt with very few friends. Living a fugitive life for a long time, Baybars entered the war against the Aybek, but lost a series of battles. Baybars describes this defeat in his own words as follows: "Some of the Akhu factions in my army began to clash with each other, so I prayed to God not to help us and to defeat us. O God, defeat us, but spare my life so that I can avenge myself." Hungry and thirsty, he was forced to hide in the deserts, as his own scribe put it. They walked until the darkness of the night grew tired of the daylight. They ate haystacks they found in the desert, if they were lucky, covered in mud. They survived by drinking rainwater. But this loneliness would not last long. The pleasant stones who loved him began to gather under Baybars' banner, because there was a terrible danger at the gate and a force greater than any enemy they had ever faced. The Mongols, under the command of Hulagu Khan, leveled Alamut Castle, the main center of the assassins, and known to be inaccessible.
On January 29, 1258, they besieged the city of Baghdad. The massacre that the Mongol forces would perpetrate in Baghdad has not been forgotten even today, so much so that the soldiers who entered the city were men, women, children, and the elderly. In the city where 200,000 people were massacred, hospitals, observatories, and libraries built over centuries were almost completely destroyed. The Islamic world's most important sources of knowledge were burned. The caliph was forced into the streets, forced to have his citizens massacred and his treasury looted. He was then starved to death. According to another claim, he was wrapped in a carpet along with his sons and trampled by horses until they died. Thousands of people were buried alive in the ground, while the city's leaders were locked in coffers and waited to suffocate. Records describe the occupation of Baghdad with the following phrase: "How many old people were there on that day, their hair stained with blood? How many children cried, but they showed no mercy that day? Israfil, the Sur." There was no such thing. Therefore, Baybars and his rivals decided to unite. Now we are approaching a turning point in history. Get ready, the Mongols took Baghdad. They plundered, then continued to advance with all their might and had now reached the borders of the Mamluk realm. Meanwhile, a brave Mamluk commander, Qutuz, had seized the Mamluk throne by killing Aybek in a coup. We must know this man well. His given name, Qutuz, means Kuduz in Turkish. He earned this name by fighting like a beast while still a young slave. Baybars, due to the Mongol threat that had come to the Mamluk Empire's door, agreed and entered its service. It was time for unity. The Mongol ruler, Humlu Sui Kutu, sent threatening letters detailing what had happened to the previous lands and that the same fate awaited them. In one letter he said, "In the name of Allah who created the heavens and the earth, we are the army of Allah. Allah created us from His anger. He drew the wrath of Allah upon Himself. By Allah, the peoples we have been haunted, surrender your will to us." He was not a Muslim, however he knew well to whom to speak and in what language. However, Qutuz, following the advice of his friend Baybars, beheaded the Mongol envoys who brought the letter and incited the people to war by hanging various cities in the Mamluk realm. However, the state had just been established and they lacked money. Therefore, all the Mamluk lords, especially Kutus and Baybars, sold all their possessions to establish the necessary economy for war. They sold all their possessions until each of them swore they had no money left. Finally, upon learning of the envoy's murder, the Sultan ordered his commanders to destroy Mamluk lands. Baybars placed spies in the regions through which the Mongol army passed. These spies hid in caves and villages, accompanied by starving wild foxes. The spies, under a strong wind, swept the tails of the hungry foxes away. He sets them on fire and releases them. The foxes run towards the Mongol army's food sources. Meanwhile, they were burning their resources, grain and fields. This caused great losses for the Mongol army. At this very moment, a Turkmen commander, forced to join the Mongol army as a prisoner, wrote a secret letter to Kutus, informing him of the Mongol army's shortcomings and the weakness of its left wing. This was a very important clue. At the forefront of the Mamluk army was Baybars with a small number of soldiers. The Mongol army's commander, Khat Boya Noyan, mistook Baybars and his soldiers for a whole army and launched an attack. However, this was a trap. The Mamluks managed to surround the Mongol army with the crescent tactic. The battle was so fierce that at one point everyone thought the Mongols would win. Even Sultan Kutus joined the battle. The victory of the Mongol army meant the destruction of the greatest power in the Islamic world. So much so that North Africa, Anatolia, and even Europe were completely destroyed. Mongol domination could have occurred. In such a situation, neither the Ottoman Empire nor the modern world could have existed. And at the bloodiest moment of the conflict, something surprising happened. A Mamluk Mongol commander named Akkush infiltrated Khatboya's unit and managed to kill him. The Mongol soldiers, demoralized by their commander's death, began to flee, but Baybars and his soldiers pursued them and killed them all, leaving none alive. This was an incredible event. For the first time in history, the Mongol army, known as the Jalut, suffered a major defeat. Commander Baybar's plans changed with Sultan Kut's selfless leadership. The fate of the world changed. These slaves succeeded in saving humanity. It became clear that the Mongols who planned to conquer the world could be stopped. But everything would not end so quickly. Problems began to arise between Sultan Kutus and Baybars, because in exchange for their support, Baybars promised the city of Aleppo. He had promised, but he hadn't kept his promise. Ultimately, Baybars orchestrated an assassination attempt on Kutus during a hunt in the forest. The event unfolded as follows. Baybars stood in front of Kutus, grabbed Kutus's sword, and then drew his own sword, publicly chanting, "Shush." Since he was the one who killed Kutus and was loved by all Mamluks, the throne was now Baybar's right. Remember, the Mamluk palace is the table of wolves. Only the strong survive here. The date is October 26, 1260, and he is now Sultan Baybars, the Sultan of the Mamluk state, the state of Turkey.
Of course, Baybars's killing of both the Shah of Turan and Kutus wasn't a chain of coincidences. He was an ambitious and intelligent man, and his rivals had been planning every detail of his ascension to the throne for many years. They only offered him the necessary excuses. When Baybars ascended to the throne, he faced the most challenging environment a sultan could face. There were many Crusader castles and cities along the coasts. The Mongol threat was still very strong. Armenian kingdoms were launching attacks. Arab revolts were also taking place within the country. On top of that, the assassins continued to carry out one assassination after another. All these powers were in various alliances. If Baybars wanted to win, he had to fight them all simultaneously. First, the greatest threat was Hulagu. Berk Khan, Another Mongol ruler who had converted to Islam was the leader of the Hulagu. Like Hulagu, Hulagu was a grandson of Genghis Khan, but he had converted to Islam. Therefore, Hulagu, who was close to Christians, was an enemy. Baybars and Berke formed a very close alliance and defeated Hulagu repeatedly. Berke Khan even said to Baybars, "I killed my own relatives for you, I shed blood for you." There is a very interesting detail in the correspondence between Baybars and Berke Khan. Normally, the word Kurd is used a lot in historical sources. Does not pass. However, out of curiosity about Berke Khan's army, Baybars asks him how many Turkmens were in his army and which Arab and Kurdish tribes he had made alliances with. Ironically, Baybars, whose family was killed and sold into slavery by the Mongols, decided to pit Genghis Khan's descendants against each other. At the request of the Seljuk sultans, Baybars traveled through Anatolia, breaking the Mongol pressure there and significantly reducing the Mongols' influence in Anatolia. Furthermore, during his Anatolian campaigns, he invaded the Armenian kingdoms, which were a major power at the time, and thus weakened Armenian power. He also captured dozens of castles that remained in the hands of the assassins and executed the leading assassins. Thus, this threat was eliminated. Friends, it would be an exaggeration to say that Baybars never sat still for a day in his life, because a new and great war began in 1271. Under Edward's leadership, the Ninth Crusade begins to destroy the Mamluk Sultanate. Just look at this list of those who fought in this bloody war. Within a year, Baybars manages to defeat all these enemies. He even brandishes his sword in the battles he engages in. He even uses debobs in castle sieges. While he generally pardons those who fight against him, he will act very harshly this time. He captures Antioch, a powerful Crusader city that has been a bloodbath for 170 years on Day D. The people there are enslaved and the men are killed. According to Baybars' scribe, the children in Antioch are sold for 12 dirhams and the women are divided up. The conquest of Antioch by Baybars was such a great loss for the Crusaders that the Crusaders described what happened here as an unprecedented massacre. They were defeated by Baybars once again, and thanks to him, they returned to Europe in 1272, never to return. On June 20, 1277, Sultan Baybar, while returning from his struggle against the Mongols in Anatolia, died at the age of 54 after drinking poisoned kumis at a banquet in Damascus, Syria. It is believed to have been an assassination attempt by the Mongols, but the perpetrators remain unknown even after 750 years. The great commander, who rose from slavery to sultanate, defeated the Mongols who stopped the Crusaders and fought nearly 100 battles throughout his life, is now dead. His tomb is still in Damascus. If you ever find yourself in this situation, don't forget to visit. Few people in history have experienced this life, starting from scratch and rising to the top of the world. Whenever you find yourself in a difficult situation, remember the great ruler Baybars. Remember, there will be hope for you.